Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome our special guest. He's a legend, Mr. Luigi Creatore. Thank you so much for making the time to do
Well,
this.
thank you for having me on.
Yes, yes. So, I think most stories are best from the beginning. Where are you from? What's the
From the beginning, you're going way back.
Yeah.
Yeah, where am I from? I was born and brought up in New York City in Hell's Kitchen.
Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, when it was Hell's Kitchen. Now it's a luxury, but in those days it wasn't. And I grew up there, and in my high school days I started writing and I started getting interested in theater. And of course I was surrounded by theaters there. And I used to sneak into the second act. Oh, because in those days, after the first act, everybody came out to smoke. And then they went in, and I went in with them. By that time, they weren't getting tickets. So I knew every second act on Broadway. So that's how I started, and then we'll skip forward, forgetting the war and all that kind of nonsense. And when I came out, I went into writing, and I teamed up with a fellow called Hugo Peretti, who was my cousin. And we started, I was a writer and he was a musician. We started making children's records, and we wrote a lot of children's records. And from there, the fellow who was the head of Mercury Records saw us making these, we made some records for him. And he said, you can do pop records. I said, sure, we can do that. So he gave us a shot, and we came up with the first hit with a group called the Gaylords, and it was the Little Shoemaker, and that was the first hit we had. And then we had Georgia Gibbs. We did Twiddly Dee. We did Dance with Me, Henry. Then we had Sarah Vaughan. They gave us Sarah Vaughan. They said, can you do anything with her? She said, jazz artist, we sell some jazz albums, but we think she should have a hit, and nobody can get her a hit. So we went to work on it, and we did a thing called Make Yourself Comfortable. And that broke her the first time. She'd come into the office ready to talk. The fellow who recorded her previous to us, he said, you're going to do Sassy? We said, yeah. He said, well, you know, I got to tell you, she goes through 90 things, nothing is good, and she leaves. She's very tough. So I said, okay, thanks for the tip. So when she came in, and I agreed, you know, Hugo and I figured it out. We were supposed to do 4 songs to a session in those days. And wait a minute, she said, I'm putting up something to read. What does it say?
It says, face the camera now and then.
Oh, okay. Look at you, I'm very happy.
Oh.
So we said, hey, instead of trying to get all these songs for her to pick, we only had 2. So when she came, we said, you know, we can't find 4 good songs. She says, I know, there's nothing out there. I said, yeah, we found 2. See if you want to do these. If not, you're going to Europe, and when you come back, we'll think about it. But the company wants you to record now. So she looked at him, she said, okay, the 2 of them. She said, there's nothing else. I said, there's nothing else. You want to do this or not? So we did it. Make Yourself Comfortable in Another Side. And it came out, and she was in Europe someplace or coming back, and it came out and it went to #1. And we got a call in the office, and she was on a bus, said, you got a call from an ocean liner. And it was Sarah, and she said, I love you, I love you, I love you, and hung up. And from then on, she came in and said, what do you want me to do? She didn't go over songs. A couple of times she met us in the studio, having never seen the song, because she was that good a musician. She'd go in and read it, you know, I'd tell, because I'm not a musician, but Hugo was.
Right.
And so I'd say, Hugo, show her the song. You go to the piano, show her the song. That was it. She went to record, and didn't let her do more than 1 or 2 takes, because if you get to the 4th or 5th take, it was another song.
Wow.
Because of her improvisation, which is beautiful for a jazz thing, but we were making pop records to sell. it's the music business, you know. You're supposed to sell them.
Right.
So, what the interesting thing I want to tell you, around that time, we recorded with her a thing called, after that one, it was How Important Can It Be, which was a hit. And then we did another thing called Mr. Wonderful. Now those two things were written by George David Weiss. You know his name?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he then became our writing partner years after that. But what was interesting is that this young lady that I lived with, is George's widow.
Oh.
So we knew each other from 40 years ago. And after George died and my wife died recently, she had Alzheimer's, and it just went on and on. But now we're together. You want to see what she looks like?
No.
Come on, they want to see what you look
Okay.
like.
Yeah.
They can't, not on radio.
Hello.
Okay, that's enough. All right, where are we?
Well, I wanted to kind of ask you about your parents.
Oh, my parents were back there. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us, was it a lot of music in the house?
Oh, yeah. My father was a very famous a bandmaster. He had a concert band that he brought over from Italy. He came over here in 1901 or 2 and cased the joint and found out what was going on, and he found a manager. He went back to Naples and he got 50 men. He said, "You want to come with me?" And it's all voluntary, you know. And they all came and they went to Philadelphia, and in the winter they practiced, and in the spring they opened at Steel Pier in Atlantic City with the band. And the whole thing was they had 50 musicians, 50, because they never had a band like that. And but he did classical music and some march things, but just a few. And then he was discovered by Oscar Hammerstein, the grandfather of the Oscar Hammerstein we know, the songwriter. The grandfather was an impresario, and he loved the band, and he brought it to New York City, to Hammerstein's roof garden. And he displayed it there, and the New York Times and all the papers said that the women were fainting and with this band. So he became a sensation, and he traveled all through the United States and Europe some, but most of the United States. And it was in the time of John Philip Sousa and those people, that he was one of the bands. As a matter of fact, in The Music Man, in the lead-in to 76 Trombones, the guy says something like, and then all the bands came to town. John Philip Sousa, Richard Pryor, the great Creatore. And that was my father. So
And he's in the frame.
He's in the frame there, but he's in the frame.
He's in the frame.
Hey, Bob! He's in the frame. That is a mask of his. I mean, that's exactly his face. Well, and then, so that's my background. What else do you want to know about my background?
I want to know about when you first started to write.
I first started to write in high school, writing for the paper. I love to write, and I was in, I remember, English class. You know, they had asked for a composition, and I wrote the composition. All the kids wrote compositions, and when they handed them back, they were marked. And I had 100, and I looked at it, and then there was red lines here, red lines here, red lines here. So I stayed after class, and I said, Mr., I forgot his name. I think it was O'Brien. I remember what he looked like, and that he had very flashy socks, but I forgot his name. Anyway, I said to him, you gave me 100. He said, yes. I said, but look, what is all this? He said, well, those are misspellings and grammatical errors. I said, how could you give me 100? He said, because those misspellings and those things, people will correct them for you. you keep writing.
Mm.
So, you know what it did? It relieved me of the fact when I was writing that I would, don't worry about the spelling, don't worry about, just write what you want to write.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great lesson, and that teacher probably doesn't exist anymore, but teachers sometimes don't know how much they influence a child just with a word or two at the right time about the right subject. And so then when I got out of high school, I went to City College for a while, and then, the war was coming, so I went and enlisted in the Navy. And I was in the Navy about 4.5 years, 5 years. And then I was discharged. And I came back to New York, and I said, what am I going to do for a living? You got to make a living. So I said, I like to write. I'm a writer. So I saw an ad in the paper for a writer. It was for the CIO. And they wanted a writer to write press releases and this and that. So I went up and I just told them I'm a writer. And I showed him some of the things I had written in the Navy. In the Navy, I wrote columns for the paper, and I wrote short stories that were published in our Navy magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So I had something to show. So the guy said, well, I'm going to give you a shot. He said, how much do you want? So I said, about $25 a week. Because I know when I left, men were working on the WPA, supporting a family for $24 a week. So I figured I'd ask for 25. And he said, I'll give you 35. I said, okay. Then I found out later the job called for 50, see, which I got a little later. But those are things, when you come out of the Navy, you don't know anything, you don't know what's really going on. But then I wrote commercially for them for a while, and I started working with other people.
The United Nations.
I wrote a book.
The United Nations.
Oh, I worked for the United Nations, thank you, Claire.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah. I went to work after the CIO. I was recommended. I went to work for the United Nations. They were having a drive, the United Nations Appeal for Children, which then morphed into UNICEF, which is still going. And I wrote for Eleanor Roosevelt, and I wrote for Trygve Lee, and a lot of the people, the celebrities that came through, I wrote speeches for them. And then I think I got into the record business with my cousin Hugo Peretti, who I met at a concert. We were sitting next to each other. My brother was giving a piano recital. And so you say, the music was all around my family.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was a musician except me. My father brought me the piano. He tried to teach me the piano. I didn't take. He brought home a violin. I dropped everything. He brought home drums. He brought home a saxophone. He says, it's a jazz instrument, but maybe you could play it. I couldn't play it. So on my 11th birthday, he said, I don't have, we were in the Depression then, and we were in a cold water flat in Hell's Kitchen. And he said, I have nothing to give you, but for music you are negative. So you don't have to take any more music lessons, anytime. And that was my present. And I don't know what I got for my 10th birthday or my 12th birthday, but for my 11th birthday, I didn't have to play music. So I am not a musician, but I'm a lyricist.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Hugo. Did you all get along very well when you worked?
Oh, we got along phenomenally well. People didn't understand how we got along so well. We became partners not only in writing, but in business, because we went into production. We wrote children's records, and we produced them, and we sold them. The first children's records we sold to a guy called Lapidus in the garment district. And he didn't know much about it, he didn't know anything about the record business, but he figured if he had this vinyl left over from his business, so he figured he could, and he had the stamps because he made buttons. So all he had to do was flatten out the mold and he made records. So he says, I'll do that. So he hired us to write children's records. And we wrote tons of them. And he pressed them and he sold them in boxes of 100 or whatever, huge box, to the 5 and 10s of this. And they sold for 10 cents or a quarter, whatever. And I told them once, we write this material and the songs, we wrote little children's songs, but they were songs. And I said, they pay royalties. He says, don't talk to me royalties. Don't talk. He says, I'll give you the money to do it, and that's it. Goodbye. So that was the choice. We took the money, a couple of $1,000 he'd give us. We make a record for $1,600, and we had $400. And that's how we kind of scrounged around, and we did some commercial jingles and stuff like that. And then about that time, how do I get along with Hugo, you're saying? Our partnership was very unique because, and I have to give him credit, he said, partnerships break up because I want that chair and I can't have it, or I'm going to take this home, or I ate out with my wife and I give it to the company and you didn't eat out, He said, forget all those things. Whatever we do, whatever we charge the company. Maybe you'll spend more and I'll spend less, but next year it'll be the other way around. And it evens off and it's not important. It's against breaking up a partnership. So that was another lesson I learned. And we did that. We just took care of each other. If one guy was out of town for a week and we had to make a decision, we made a decision without him. And we just, people don't know how we got along. About 30 years we were together. Yes?
Oh, go ahead.
No, and during that time that we were together and we were producing, we started with Mercury Records, and then a fellow named, whatever his name was right now, wait a minute. We started with Mercury Records, and then we formed Roulette Records with Morris Levy. That was the guy. He said, come with me and I'll give you 50% of the thing. I said, that sounds good. So we went there and we started recording our first record out. When we were at Mercury, there was a young kid came along and auditioned, and we liked him. But we had to get permission from Chicago, which was the main office, to who we signed. So we sent the dub to Chicago, and we got an answer. We got too many boys. Okay, so we forgot about it. When we went to Roulette and started looking for artists, I said, what about that kid that came in? Where is he? We tried to look him up, but we couldn't find him. And I put a private detective on. And he started looking, and he came up with, the guy was at a lumber camp in Seattle. So we called him and said, you want to make a record? He said, yeah. I said, okay, come in, we'll do something. So he came in, and we made Honeycomb, Jimmy Rogers, and it went to #1. And then we made another one called Kiss Is Sweeter Than Wine. And then we made another one called Oh, I'm Falling in Love Again, and so forth. He had 5 hits in a row. And then we left. We went to RCA. RCA came after us, actually. And we didn't want to go. We said, we have our own company. They said, well, we'll give you that, we'll give you that. And finally, they said, we'll give you $1 million to come over. So I said, well, we can't refuse it. Because in those days, $1 million was $1 million.
Yeah.
And so we went over. And we went there for about 5.5 years. And what we did, we brought Sam Cooke in to RCA. He had a great run, great talent. But I was getting, you were interviewing me as a songwriter, right?
Well, we can go
Get
anywhere.
anywhere I want. Okay. But going back to being as a songwriter, when we were at RCA, we also wrote some stuff, besides being busy, we were producing records, that's what we did. Which it's a lot of work to produce a record, because it's not just a recording, there's a lot happens before. But Julie Stein, the composer, yeah. He was a friend of ours, kind of. We did one of his shows, we recorded, we knew him. And he said, you guys write pretty good, why don't you write more? And I say, why we don't write more? Because we don't get to it, because we're busy with other stuff. He said, I have an idea. You need somebody to force you into the situation where you gotta write. There's a fellow called George David Weiss. He just broke up with Weiss and Benny Benjamin. Benjamin and Weiss it was, before us. And he's alone, and he should be with somebody. So he came up and we talked, and we started writing together. And we wrote, from then on, the three of us wrote together. And we wrote a lot of songs, but the big ones we wrote were Can't Help Falling in Love,
Yeah.
for Presley, and The Lion Sleeps Tonight. And then one day we were sitting around and we had to go into the studio, and George said to me, there's a guy doing a Louis Armstrong album, and he wants me to help him write a couple of songs for the album. He says, do you mind if I do that? I said, George, you're a writer. We're doing a lot of other things. Go write and come back. So he went to write, and he was gone one day. He came back the next morning. And I said, George, what did you write? He said, well, I wrote a thing called What a Wonderful World.
Yeah.
which just exploded. Not then. That's a story, of what happens to songs sometimes. A song can come out with the right actor, the right artist, and become an immediate smash from the record. Sometimes, as in the case of What a Wonderful World, nothing happened. It came out on the Louis Armstrong album, and Armstrong was played here and there, but nothing happened. Along came a movie called Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah.
And who was it, the comedian that played that?
Robin Williams.
Yeah, Robin Williams played that. He was a disc jockey in Vietnam. And he played What a Wonderful World. And the greatest use I've seen of a song. Here comes a screen in Vietnam, and the bombers are coming in, and the children are on the street crying, and there's explosions here and there, but no sound. The only sound is Louis Armstrong singing What a Wonderful World. And the kids crying and getting slaughtered. The contrast was so great that it was a fantastic use of that song. Now, after that, some of the jazz guys started picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard it here and I heard it there, and then some more, and then it grew, and then some advertisers started picking it up for commercial ads. And then it kept going, and it became a giant. You don't know how big that song is. Anyway, that's the history of that song.
Well, you mentioned a song there that everyone knows, the Elvis Presley song that you wrote with...
Can't Help Falling. I wrote it with Hugo and with George.
Yeah, tell us about the writing of that song. How did that come about?
Well, what happened was that Julian Auerbach, he was a publisher who published Elvis Presley. He had a firm with Elvis Presley. And everything went through that firm or it didn't get done. So he came up to us, we knew him, he came up to the office at RCA, and he said, I'd like to give you the scene when Presley comes back from Europe in the movie. Blue Hawaii was the movie. He comes back from Europe and he has one of those boxes.
Music box.
A music box, with the tinkly thing, the European sound, and he opens it and he sings a love song. We need the love song. And you people, I think you could capture the European flavor. So we did it. We took a couple of days, and I remember we had a big office here, and then an adjoining office, so we could go in and make phone calls and get out of the thing. And I was sitting making phone calls, and Hugo and George were at the piano, and they had this melody going, ba 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 ba, which was the jingle of the music box. And I was in the next room, and I kept hearing, and they kept doing it, and they kept doing it. And then I suddenly said, I went out and I said, the name of this song is I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. It fits there. They said, right. And they kept going on. And so then they had that much. And George went home. George never stopped working. He came in the next morning. See, we stopped. When we stopped, we went and did something else. He went home and he kept working. So he came in with the top. Wise men say, only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Then we together we wrote the second stanza, which is now craftsmanship. Once you've got the first 8, now you know you don't have to be a genius. You have to be a craftsman to line them up. And so we wrote, shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? Then we worked together on the middle part for another couple of days, because we worked in the mornings, and then George went away, and so it took 2 or 3 days, but we got the middle. And then we got the middle, and they were playing this song, and we got through the middle, and they stopped, because the last 2 lines we didn't have. And they kept playing it, and I said, oh, wait a minute, I think of like a river flows surely through the sea, darling, so it goes, some things are meant to be. I said, I hear, take my hand. And they were sitting at the piano, and they both turned and looked at me. Now, what the hell are you talking about? You hear, take my hand. They looked at one of those disgusted looks, both of them. I said, I got to come out of this. And somehow, I said, take my whole life too. George says, yes! He was very demonstrative and very enthused when, So that's the whole song. I've dissected it pretty well. But that's the way it happened, over 2 or 3 days, in segments of 2 or 3 hours work,
Another song that you mentioned, everyone knows the song that the Tokens did.
Yeah. The Lion Sleeps Tonight.
The Lion Sleeps Tonight.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that song evolved.
Well, that song, see, there was an African chant. This goes way back to Africa. There was a fellow called, forget his name, he had a record company in Africa, and one of the things he did was he recorded African chants from the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
So they would come in, different groups would come in and say, this is a chant from this tribe and that tribe. And they would record them, he made albums of them. So Gallo, his name was. And that was the name of the company, Gallo Records. And he distributed these. Some of them came to the United States. And there was another publisher in the United States who then published a folio book of these chants and African things, and one of them was the melody of The Lion Sleeps Tonight, but no words or anything. It was just a melody and whim away, whim. And so then this group, the folk group, picked it up and did it as Whim Away.
Yeah, the Weavers.
The Weavers did it as Whim Away.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't a hit or anything. It was nice in folk music. And that was around. Now the Tokens had an act, and in their act, they did Whim Away, the Pete Seeger, was that it?
Yeah.
Pete Seeger's version. So when we were doing a session with them, we had 2 or 3 songs, and they said, we'd like to do this. So I said, well, what is it? And they sang it. I said, it's very nice. Where are the lyrics? So they said, there are no lyrics. Well, the Weavers did the song, and the Tokens were doing it in their act. So when they were picking songs to record, they said, we want to do this. So I said, where are the lyrics? And they said, there are no lyrics. I said, well, we're not doing a song with no lyrics. You need lyrics. So they said, well, you know, who's going to do the lyrics? I said, we'll do the lyrics. I said, okay. So they went away. Now we prepared the session, and Hugo and George got a hold of this. They had to change some of the melody because it didn't sing well with lyrics. It's hard to explain, but it went down too low where you had to mumble the lyrics. It wasn't good. So we had to change it. They changed the notes to that first part. Then they added a middle, which never existed. And then they changed the ending again musically. Then we wrote the lyric. You know, and it's a simple lyric, but it was very effective. And we wrote it the night before we had to record, and the Tokens didn't know it, didn't know the lyric at all, they knew the song. So when we went in to record, I gave him a yellow pad with the lyrics on it. It's the first time he ever saw the lyric. And he sang the lyric, they didn't want to do it, but they did it. I said, come on. And they did it once, twice, and when that came out, I think it's the fastest hit, you know, fastest record to become a hit that I've ever seen. It took about 2 or 3 weeks. It was #1. It was exploded. And the company at that time wasn't giving us much backing. They wouldn't take an ad on a new group or anything. And we didn't need anything. Somebody, I think in Philadelphia, started it, and it went like wildfire. Mm-hmm. And that's that one.
Well, you mentioned a couple of people, and it's really interesting, all the people you produced. You mentioned Sam Cooke.
Yeah.
There was also Perry Como.
Perry Como, yeah.
There was Sarah Vaughan, right?
Sarah Vaughan.
And
Jimmy Rogers.
Jimmy Rogers. Not the country Jimmy Rogers.
No, not
the other
the
one.
pop, yeah.
So who was the most thrilling to work with
Most thrilling?
when you were producing?
Well, Sarah Vaughan was the greatest musician and interpreter of songs. She was just thrilling to go in with, and we had to restrain her because we were looking for the pop record, you know. We did Whatever Lola Wants with her. It was a hit. But if you let her do it 3 or 4 times, it would have been another song, and then it wouldn't have got played. But she was the most interesting to me. Perry Como, you know, he was such an idol. To work with this man, it was a little overwhelming, but he made us very comfortable, took us in his office, and we talked and went back and forth and told jokes and enjoyed it very much. He was what he looked like, very easygoing. We want to do this, okay, let's do that. And I bring him a song, I think this will be a hit. And he says, I don't think so. He says, no, he says, it might be a hit, you're right, but I don't like the song. I want to do better songs. So I said, okay. He didn't want to do little ditties, and he says that if I get a hit, I'm between this and the other guy, and they're doing all, you know, it was out of his element. Mm-hmm. As it happens to everybody, as they grow older, the current stuff is leaving them, you know, whether it's musical or lyrical or attitude or what they're saying or how they're saying it. It changes. So the guy that was a big act star, whether he's a comedian or a singer or whatever, as time goes by, if he stays with what he's doing, the world changes around him. Mm-hmm. Except me, nothing has changed.
Well, you know, it's really interesting because so many of these songs are still heard all the time.
Yeah.
So when somebody listens to something that you either wrote or produced,
yeah,
what do you want the listener to get out of that experience of hearing something that you worked on or wrote?
Well, you know, I want them to be pleased. I want them to if it's a rhythm thing, I want him to feel rhythm in his body. He may not know it, he's tapping his foot listening to it. He's enjoying it. It's doing something inside for him. If it's a strong ballad, I hope it hits something in him that resonates. If it's an up-tempo, I think it resonates in a different way, make him happy. That Lion Sleeps Tonight, people just smile when it comes on. You know, they love it, everybody.
Right away.
Kids. And the kids all know it. That song was written in 1961, and the kids today know it.
Right.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
What is the best thing about being Luigi Creatore?
Having Claire Weiss here.
Oh.
You know, I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, sure
Well, it's
did.
obvious. That's a no-brainer. You know, and then when I told you who she is, George Weiss's widow, but he died some time ago, and then my wife was ill and ill and ill, and then she died. And we got together because we were doing some business things together in the publishing, and then, you know, we got to know each other. Well, we met 40 years ago when George and everybody met her, and then she married. After, I'd like to say after we met, shortly after we got married, but not to each other. She married George, and I married somebody else, and then now we're together and very, very happy. You happy?
Absolutely.
See?
It's wonderful. Well, what are you most proud of in your career?
In my career. Well, I'm proud of a couple of plays I wrote.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You're very passionate about theater.
Yes, I love theater. I would loved it since I was a kid. And then after George, well, before he died, because he got sick, Hugo died, George got sick, so I was alone. And so I started writing plays. Right here in Florida, I started writing for the community theater for something to do. Then I put some of those together, went to New York, and his producer said, I like this play. And she produced it, a thing called Flamingo Court, which is about 3 families living in an apartment building in Florida, New Yorkers who moved down. And so there are 3 different plots, 3 different stories. And the reason for them being in the same condo and the whole thing was that I was doing it for the community theater here, and they couldn't get 3 sets. So basically it's the same set. It's apartment 1A, 2A, and 3A. They changed the sofa and a couple of pictures, and you were in a different apartment. And that played, we had fun with that. And that was went into New York, and we did it with a couple of theatrical names, and it went for about a year, and then it closed. And next year, the producer said, I could do better with this without the names, just a good ensemble cast, and she did it again. So it ran again. And then I did a play called An Error of the Moon, which was about Edwin Booth. It tells the story. He's an actor. He was the prime Shakespearean actor of his day in the 1800s. And his brother was John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln. So he's telling the story of his relationship with his brother and the wife. He suspects that his wife is having an affair with his brother. Now, it's not true, but he suspects it and he gets obsessed with it. Meantime, he's playing Macbeth. He's playing, wait a minute, he's playing, what is it with the, Othello. He's playing Othello, who is obsessed with his wife being unfaithful to him, and she's not. It's the same situation. Anyway, that was a very good play. It ran for a season, and it did well. I like writing for theater, and I like being in it, you know, seeing it develop. the rehearsals, the putting together. And then I recently wrote another thing called Daddy's Little Girl. And my producer wouldn't produce it because she said it was too heavy for the theater, for off-Broadway. And because of the subject matter, which was the father who raped his 13-year-old daughter, and then as time goes by, he's running for governor, and this thing is starting to come out. And she said audiences would walk out on that. So I said, okay, I was up in New York with Joyce, I said, let's go to Italy. And we went to Italy for
Claire.
3 weeks to forget about it. What?
You said Joyce.
I said Joyce? That was another wife.
Okay.
I said,
So are
said
you
Claire.
writing anything right now?
am I writing anything?
Right
No,
now.
I'm disgusted.
Yeah.
Because this last play is a good play, and they say the audiences will walk, it's not good for theater because the audiences won't take it. And you turn on television or go to movies, they're doing everything under the sun.
Yeah.
You know, there's no subject barred, but for off-Broadway, the little old ladies who go there for matinees would walk out. I don't know. So, c'est la vie, but, you know, I'll come up with something else.
Have you thought about writing like fiction or
Fiction?
books, you know?
Well, yeah, I started out, I wrote a book when I was a kid. Still, when I was working for the CIO, I was at home writing a book which was published when I was like 24 years old. And called This World Is Mine. And it's about a sailor who gets amnesia. And it's his experience in the hospital for 5 days till he comes out of it. And that's all it is, nothing before, nothing after. And it was very well received. I got nice reviews in the New York Times and all that. And that was it. And I wrote a lot of fiction, a lot of short stories prior to that, you know. Then I got away from that kind of writing. I love to write for the theater, though. Yeah.
Well, my last question is very open-ended. For anyone who's either watching this
Yes.
or listening to it or reading a transcript, what would you say to anyone who's experiencing this interview?
Experiencing the interview, I just like to give them any information they want to know. If you're saying, does anybody that's looking or listening want to become a writer, what would they do? We just have to write. There's no formula. There are schools, and I've been to them, but you don't. That's not really where you learn. You know where you learn? You learn there. I was going to say on the typewriter. Now it's on the keyboard of your computer. That's where you learn, with that blank screen, and you have to do it. And you have to sit there until you do something, and you sit there an hour or two and waste the time. Next day, do it again and waste the time. And the third or fourth day, you'll say, I can't waste this time, I have to write something. And you will write something.
Thank you very much.
Listen, it was enjoyable
It was a
meeting
pleasure.
you. I love the mustache.
Thank you.
And I love the way you present things and talk. Made me very relaxed, and I say anything I want, and it's fun. Okay?
It was a joy.